unprecedented times, and I say this because we're finally reaching a tipping point in the United States, it seems to me. A point where many will be finally forced to accept coercion and blind obedience to the state, or will decidedly take a stand and fight back against a death culture that has now grown so large that it threatens the very democracy for which the founding fathers fought. Lincoln, in his notable address at Gettysburg, in one brief sentence expressed what I would call the national consensus of America. That proposition by which all shall stand or fall definitively in the judgment of history and as a nation. On that November 19, 1863, Lincoln declared, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This notion of a proposition means a statement of truth. And it is this statement of truth on which all other freedoms are regulated in a democracy. Jefferson would be equally emphatic in the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At the foundational level of the political community, that is, the respect and law for life must come first. To have inalienable rights means that we possess human rights that are not within the jurisdiction of the state, neither to grant or to take away. These rights cannot be taken without grave injustice in a democracy, because they are due to man due to his nature. They are not a benign concession of the government. They are due to him by virtue of him being man, the kind of being that he is. Therefore, unalienable rights are beyond the jurisdiction of the state. Now, to transgress these is to openly demonstrate the illegitimate nature of the transgression and the erosion of democracy. Now, on this consensus of the equality of all men, this is the national understanding of what America is. And I submit that on that rests the whole of our way of life. Radicals of all sorts throughout history have always denied the possibility of these foundational notions of democracy, these objective principles that hold the political order together. The greatest danger, I believe, in democracy is that these forces today wield power to erode these foundations. Now, the Declaration specifically addresses the other question that must be properly circumscribed if we are to have freedom and the pursuit of happiness preserved as a nation. Namely, what is the role of government? What is the legitimate function of the state? It states the Declaration that to secure these rights, these unalienable rights, governments are instituted among men. So indeed, governments exist in the classical sense to serve man. Man does not exist to serve the government. Finally, the Declaration foresees the possibility that those chosen to govern may audaciously seek to ignore, abolish, constrict the fundamental and unalienable rights, as well as other constitutional freedoms of its citizens. And it gives a prescription to solve the problem. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new governments, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So to understand the problem of the right to life in a democracy, one must understand it from the beginning. So we must think about the problem carefully. No fundamental rights make any sense in a democracy if the first right, the right to life, is not protected by law. That is to say, property rights, for instance, are not possible, cannot be understood freedom of speech, freedom of association make no sense if you're a slave. Rights and law must be secured in order. Now, why is this first right that for now 40 years has been without that protection, eroding and destroying democracy in my view? Consider the following: that it is the corruption of the rule of law for the following reasons. When we live in a political society, we concede to the state, to the government, the use of lethal power. The government can indeed defend us from foreign and domestic enemies, even in certain cases using lethal force. But the grant, as it were, of lethal force is circumscribed to the state and the state only. Now, in abortion, when somebody starts one of these infamous abortion bills, it has become in this country a business requirement that the state give a franchise of lethal power to particular citizens. You have many business requirements when you start a business. But now they request of the government that they need the right to kill innocent citizens in order to start their business. That it is a requirement for them to make their livelihood that the government grant a franchise of the power that they have, lethal power, to make a living. Just imagine the thought. You're applying for the right to kill other people, and you actually get it in this country. This franchising of the power to kill is granted in massive scale in our day and age. But this is delegitimizing the authorities that grant it, and it is corrupting the rule of law. It makes mockery, furthermore, of the medical science, that for such a practice as abortion this would be granted, and it has emasculated the police force, sworn to protect life and the innocent from violent death. Not far from here in Germantown, Nancy Stade and Todd Stade obtained such franchise. And they brought into Germantown the most notorious late-term abortionist in the nation, Leroy Carhart. Now it is helpful to know, for those of you who are not there and have not been involved, who this man really is. Even though he possesses a medical degree, he has never practiced medicine, authentically so, one day of his life. He has been an abortionist, a practitioner of late-term abortion, and partial birth abortion when it was possible, his entire life. This is what this man does. In Germantown, Sunday night and Mondays, sometimes Monday mornings, he kills babies up to 9 months, right up to the moment of birth. I stand often at that abortion mill every Monday and I watch women, 8 months, 7 months, 9 months pregnant, walking in there to destroy their child. This man has single-handedly killed over 20,000 human beings. Think about the numbers. He has killed more people than any Nazi war criminal we ever chased after the conclusion of the war. There are certain names that will live in infamy in our society, names such as Klaus Barbie. Nicholas Klaus Barbie was known as the Butcher of Lyon, and he was accused after the war of killing 14,000 people. Carhart is at 20,000 and counting as we sit here. Joseph Mengele, who was known as the Todesengel, the angel of death, who sent in one instant 750 women to the gas chamber in Auschwitz. I never call Carhart a doctor because it is a lie. I always call him the Butcher of Germantown. It is so infamous what he does that in a previous practice with George Tiller, they used to dispose of the bodies of the babies in a public incinerator where they would burn the little cadavers. But one day a journalist went to this horrid place, and she took a picture of a dog that had gotten into one of the bags and was consuming one of the fetuses. There was a public uproar, and he was not allowed to use the public incinerator anymore. So he installed one in his office, an incinerator. So he would kill and then burn the bodies This is why so many of you are out of Wisteria on Sundays, on Mondays, on Tuesdays. It is not possible that this continue, and we continue our regular lives as if nothing were happening. I have said often, if people, Catholics, don't stand against this evil, you will stand for nothing. You probably will never encounter a greater evil in your life, God willing, than what is happening in Germantown. If this does not move you to action, to get out there, to protest, to pray, to seek to do everything possible to shut it down, I don't know what will. You just heard in the Mass, be doers of the word, not simply to hear. The West is dying because people of faith do very little. I say often that the barbarians are no longer at the gates, they're in the city. Now the problem is not disconnected from another big problem that's in the horizon. It's actually here already. You've all heard of this new HHS mandates by which the administration, through the auspices of Kathleen Sebelius, seek to force not just religious institutions, everybody, to pay for abortifacients, contraception, and sterilization. Now it's good to know who Sebelius is, because I hear bishops and cardinals often say they are so surprised and disappointed at the recent developments. I told one such prelate some facts about Sebelius, which I'll share with you. When Carhart and George Tiller, another late-term abortionist, worked together, and she was running for governor in Kansas, George Tiller started a political action committee. It's one of these committees that raises money for candidates. He raised tens of thousands of dollars for Sebelius to win the race as governor of Kansas. She knows him. She knows Carhart. When she was governor, she hosted both Tiller and Carhart, Planned Parenthood, and the late-term abortion industry in the governor's mansion. There are pictures of this. You can look up on the internet. Sebelius said she has carefully considered weighing religious freedom and the rights of women. She is not. It is good to know who we are dealing with. She has been in this ideological struggle to promote abortion for years. Those dealing on our side with the administration need to understand what they're up against. Now, it is also clear that given that one patient out of 6 is receiving medical care from the Catholic Church, that the mantra of the administration that they care for the poor becomes all of a sudden irrelevant. All of a sudden, their mantra that they want choice is no longer valid when it comes to pushing abortion and the death culture on the United States. Cardinal World just sent a letter February 13th explaining his conclusion of the so-called accommodation for religious institutions. At this point, he writes, it appears that nothing has really changed. Religious employers are still being compelled to provide insurance plans that offer free abortion-inducing drugs, sterilizations, and contraceptives in violation of their religious freedom. What is at stake here is the question of human freedom. The authors of the Bill of Rights enshrine freedom of religion as our nation's first and founding principle. We should not be reduced to petitioning the government for rights that the Constitution already guarantees. The only complete solution to the problem that this mandate poses for religious liberty is for Congress to pass legislation to protect our freedom. Now, it's important to make one distinction. We must be careful to not fall for the ruse of acquiring a religious exemption. You can only theoretically, soundly, from a moral point of view, I would say, ask for an exemption from a law that is just. That is to say, it makes no sense for the Church to ask for an exemption from the one-child abortion policy in China. You don't ask for exemption of those things. You fight those things. It makes no sense for people of faith and people who can still reason and are slavery, it is a nonsensical request. If you're in Nazi Germany to ask for an exemption that Catholics don't have to wear the armband with the Star of David, is outrageous. It's good to remember the lessons of history, because as George Santayana, who was a famous philosopher, once wrote, if we don't, we will repeat them. The slide in Germany was previous to Nazi Germany. It's good to remember the demise of the medical profession in Germany came before Nazi Germany. At that time, and it's a model to think about these days, there was a young girl, her name was Sophie Scholl. And Sophie Scholl and her brother Hans Scholl started in Germany something that was known as the White Rose. She was a student of philosophy at the University of Munich, and they composed 6 pamphlets, which they distributed, mainly at the University of Munich, in order to try to wake up the German nation before it was too late. In the first pamphlet she distributed, and you may know this, she was being sought by the Gestapo everywhere. Nobody knew who the White Rose was, and there were just 6 people, more or less. In the first pamphlet she wrote, nothing is so unworthy of a civilized nation as allowing itself to be governed without opposition by an irresponsible clique that has yielded to base instinct. Who among us has any conception of the dimensions of shame that will befall us and our children when one day the veil has fallen from our eyes in the most horrible crimes that infinitely outdistance in every human measure reach the light of day? I have been blessed to know many members of the German resistance, including the son of Klaus Stauffenberg, who attempted on Hitler's life. And you can still hear, for many years after the war, they will tell you the echoes of the young generations asking their parents and grandparents, what were you doing during the war? Where were you? What were you thinking when this was happening? What are we thinking when Leroy Carhart kills babies up to 9 months? We stay home in the comfort of our shelters, in the security of our sacristies, and no one does anything. We too will be asked, what were we doing? What were we possibly thinking was more important? She wrote, if everyone waits until the other man makes a start, the messengers of avenging nemesis will come steadily closer. We've already given up on the inalienable right to life, and now comes liberty, religious freedom, freedom of conscience. Then even the last victim will have been cast senselessly into the maw of the insatiable demon. Therefore, she says, every individual conscious of his responsibility as a member of a Christian in Western civilization must defend himself as best he can at this late hour. It is late. He must work against the scourges of mankind, offer passive resistance, resistance wherever you may be, forestall the spread of this atheistic war machine before it is too late. Sophie Scholl and her brother would eventually be apprehended, and she would die by guillotine. It's amazing to think in the 20th century that was still possible. When she was in the courtroom facing Ronald Freisler, who was one of the nastiest judges of the Nazi regime, she said, somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is also believed by many others. They just don't dare to express themselves as we did. Her last words before she was executed: how can we expect righteousness when there's hardly anyone willing to give up itself individually to a righteous cause? sunny day and I have to go. But what does my death matter if the rust thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action? Following her death, the pamphlets will be copied and smuggled out of Germany, and they were later to be distributed by the Allies, and they dropped them from planes all throughout Germany. Famous playwright Leroy Carhart stated that it was possibly the most spectacular moment of resistance that I can think of in the 20th century. The fact that 5 little kids in the mouth of the wolf, where it really counted, had the tremendous courage to do what they did is spectacular to me. The bust of Sophie Scholl is now in the great temple of Valhalla, where all the great Germans are lodged. In a national poll in Germany, trying to determine who were the greatest of all Germans in history, she came in 4th. But had the votes of the young people been the only votes counted, she would have been 1st. She pulled ahead of Bach and Beethoven. Now, on this notion of this exemption, because I think it might still be a temptation for some, and I think maybe the administration will relent, it's good to remember one good statement, I would say, that really explains the problem by Archbishop O'Brien of Baltimore. He was writing a letter to Governor O'Malley to oppose same-sex marriages, but it still applies. He wrote to him, in his frequent references to religious exemptions, it is clear, and others are hoping to gain, it is clear the governor and others are hoping to gain votes for the bill by quelling the voices of religious leaders, and others who rightfully believe such legislation tramples religious freedom. More importantly, our fundamental concern does not rest in a concern simply to protect our own interests, but to protect the interests of our whole society. I think the situation is grave for democracy right now. And I think we ought to seek to preserve not just our cultural freedom, this is not just a pro-life issue, but the other 2 freedoms that must be protected in every democracy, political freedom and economic freedom. If you think about the problem carefully, you will see whenever we lose ground on cultural freedoms, such as pro-life issues, we immediately lose political freedom. This would be the first time that citizens in the United States would be coerced to do something that's against their conscience. It's a slippery slope from there if you don't stand for this one now. If you don't prepare psychologically for dissent in the public square, for a public witness, you will not be ready when things get difficult. This is what happened in Germany. They never knew when to act. They ignored the problem. And then they were too scared to actually do it when the costs became pretty high. If economic freedom disappears, cultural freedom will also begin to disappear. And this HHS mandate makes it so clear. It is against life, but we have to pay for it, losing economic freedom. It is the loss of political freedom. This is a bigger problem in a sense, and it has nothing to do with contraception per se. This is the ruse they're using, of course. This has to do with the preservation of the way of life that we believe in, with the freedoms that our founders fought for. Be doers of the word and not hearers only, we heard today in Mass. And let me close with this. It is still astonishing to me the incredible zeal with which the other side works. How they are dismantling the institutions, what Gramsci, that Italian communist, called for in the West. He said the West, communism in the West, socialism in the West, will prevail if we have what he called cultural hegemony, if they can control academia, the press, and the religious institutions, education, communication, and the churches. He reminds me of William Butler Yeats' great poem, The Second Coming, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But it's good to hear those lines again, just a few. Things fall apart, he wrote, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed and everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. What are we to do? We have long advocated in Germantown that every community ought to seek to shut down their own abortion clinics. Proximity brings with it responsibility. You cannot change Roe v. Wade, you cannot change the Supreme Court, but you can shut down these places. 2, do not take your faith and freedom for granted. They are trying to privatize religion, circumscribe religion to Sunday Mass. The public square is ours. Christianity is at the foundation of our nation, and Christianity built the West. This is our civilization, not theirs. They're like parasites still living of the goodness of what the Christian world built. Encourage your priests and shepherds to get out there and lead. I tell them, without any shame, I do not know what else you might be doing that is more important than this. If you do not get ahead of this battle, if you do not stand between the women and our children, why are we shepherds? We cannot lead, as it's become common to say, from behind. Politically, we must absolutely vote these agents of war against civilization out of office. I have said this openly, shamelessly, because it's true. If you do not believe in the right to life, and you are not going to protect constitutional liberties, you are unfit to rule. While we have political freedom, we need to do something about that. Finally, we must become visible to our bishops, that they see people on the streets, demonstrating, so they realize that we're behind them. We don't communicate with them often. They need to see us. Let me close with this. We must carry this legacy that is ours as believers and as Americans. It's a legacy that constituted our nation. And I close where I began, with Lincoln in the fields of Gettysburg. It is for us, the living, he wrote, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here resolve, highly resolve, that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. May it be so. Amen.